Hi everyone, I'm Umesh Rana and welcome back to the Programming Fields. So if you have been learning Laravel, you have definitely come across the terms service container and service providers. And let's be real, at first they sound like some next level scary stuff, right? But trust me, once you actually get them, you will wonder why you ever thought they were complicated. And here is the thing, these two are super important. They are not just some hidden features in Laravel, they are literally the engine that powers Laravel, or in simple words, they are basic building blocks of Laravel framework. If you want to get better at Laravel, if you want to write cleaner code, or even if you are preparing for interviews, understanding these will give you a huge edge. So today I will walk you through everything step by step, and I will keep it simple, practical, and yes, we are gonna create our own custom service and provider. So you will see it all in action. And before we start, if you find this kind of content useful, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you don't miss future tutorials from Programming Fields. Alright, let's jump in. Now before we start, let me tell you why this matters. Service container and service provider are not just advanced concepts hidden deep in Laravel, they are everywhere. Laravel itself uses them to boot features like routing, database, authentication, and for us as developers, they help keep our code clean and reusable. Testing also becomes a bridge because we can easily swap real services with fake ones. And of course, in interviews, if you can confidently explain these, it instantly shows your deeper understanding of Laravel. Okay, first question, what the heck is a service container? Let's use a simple example to understand this. Just imagine the Laravel service container as vending machine. But instead of snacks or drinks, it is holding all the important reusable objects which your Laravel application needs, just like mailer, database connection, logger, or even your own custom tools. Now, how does it work? When you want the vending machine to stock something, you tell it, hey, when someone asks for cold drinks, give them a cola. This is called binding. Here binding means on-demand request or needs. Later, when you actually want a cola, you ask the machine and it gives it to you. That is called resolving. Laravel does this for you all the time behind the scenes. For example, when you write a controller and add something in the constructor, Laravel says, yeah, I know what this is. Let me give it to you from the container. So in the simple words, we can say every core features or object resides in the container and Laravel will make you available when it needed. Now we will talk about why service container. Because service container makes your life easier. The first is your code is cleaner and you don't need to create the same object again and again. Second, your code is testable. So with dependency injection, you can replace a real service with a fake one for testing. Let's say, for example, instead of sending real emails, you inject a fake mailer. And the third one is it gives flexibility. If tomorrow you want to switch from one API service to another, just change the binding and your whole app adjusts automatically. Pretty cool, right? But question, how do we actually tell this vending machine about our own custom stuff? That is where service providers come in. Now, before we talk about service providers, let's quickly see where they actually come into play with Laravel starts. So whenever you run a Laravel project, it always begins at public index.php. So in order to understand this, let me jump to the Laravel project. So already I have a Laravel 12 application set up, okay? And firstly, we will talk about bootstrapping of Laravel, from where Laravel framework actually starts. So whenever you run a Laravel project, it always begins at public index.php. So if you will expand this public folder available inside root of the project, here we have this index.php file. And this is the front door of entire application. Inside it, firstly we have these two import statements. Then we have define Laravel start microtime, and this defines a constant Laravel start whose value is current Linux timestamp with microsecond precision, which will be a floating number. Okay, but why it is here? Because this is being used later in different places, example in logs, debug output, or performance profiling, to measure how long the request or boot process took. Defining as a constant is tiny bit faster and prevents accidental reassignment in the same variable. And practically, you will see this used in profiler bars or in debug messages to show request time, right? Now next we have this vendor autoload.php. This is very important. Vendor autoload.php is the composer autoloader which is generated by composer. And we already know the composer is dependency manager for PHP, right? Now what the autoloader does? This registers one or more autoload functions with PHP so that when your code references a class that has not been loaded yet, PHP will call composer's autoloader, which knows how to find and require that class file automatically. So first, Laravel registers composer's autoloader, then it requires bootstrap app.php. This file is super important because here Laravel creates the application instance. That means object of the entire application. So you can think of it as the brain being switched on. Then we have handle request. Okay, so this is where Laravel takes the incoming HTTP request and processes it fully. Let's split it to understand this better. Here we have this request capture function, which is a static method that builds illuminate HTTP request object and which is coming here as illuminate HTTP request, right? It converts raw PHP superglobals variable into a clean request object. Further, we have this app handle request function. This tells the application object, here is the request, please run it through Laravel only. And internally, Laravel loads and registers all service providers using the register methods available inside service provider. Further, this will bootstraps them using boot function. So in simple words, the request capture function take the raw HTTP request and wrap it nicely. Further, this handle request function tells, okay Laravel, process this request from start to finish and send back a response. Finally, Laravel starts loading service providers. And that is why service providers are called the heart of Laravel. They are literally the first thing Laravel runs to set up routing, database, sessions, authentication, basically everything. So now that you know how Laravel bootstraps, let's dive into service providers and see how they actually work. But before jumping ahead, let's navigate to this bootstrap app.php, which is available inside this root of this project. So if we'll expand bootstrap, here we have app.php. So initially, when framework starts, the request comes into this via index.php, right? From here, this will check the request type if it is web, commands, API or channel, then respectively it will redirect that request to that particular route. And further we have middleware applied, okay? So here in this with middleware function, if you have any middleware applied, that will intercept the request before sending this to the route. Okay. Now let's jump to this providers.php file. Here we have array, okay, which contain basically service providers. After Laravel 11, the folder structure has been changed and all the core service provider have been moved to the framework internally and they are not visible here. Before Laravel 11, all the service providers were available inside config app.php. Okay, and here we used to have one providers array and there we were having all the availables provider. Further, if we were creating any custom service provider, then we had to register inside that array, right? But after Laravel 11, all the core service providers have been moved internally, so we don't need to modify them. Now further, if we'll create any custom service provider, then that will be registered automatically in this providers array here. Okay. Currently, by default, we have one service provider, which is app service provider registered. Now let's talk about service providers. Again, in simple words, if the service container is the vending machine, then the service provider is the manager. It is the one who loads everything into the machine, that means in the service container, and says, okay, here is how you build this and here is how you hand it out. And the fun fact, when Laravel starts up, meaning when framework bootstraps, the first thing it does, it load a bunch of service providers that we already saw in this index.php. That is how the whole framework even knows what to do. Routing, database, sessions, authentication, all of that is booted through providers only. Now we will talk about providers methods. In every service provider, there are two key methods available. The first one will be register. This function is where you bind things into the service container. So in simple word, through this register function, you are stocking the vending machine. Next we have boot method. This method runs after everything is ready into the container. So you can think of it as, okay, the shop is open. Now let's start serving customers. So just remember, register function is setup and boot function is execution. I guess we discussed enough theory. Now let's do something practical and we will create a very simple logging service. Just something that logs a message and shows us how service container and providers work together. We will go step by step so it is easy to follow. Alright, so let's jump to the Laravel 12 application back and I will show you in this itself. So I will start from a service. So firstly I will navigate to terminal and here I will create one class using PHP addition make class command. And this I want to create as service class. Okay. So firstly, I will keep it inside one folder as services and then I will name it as simple logger. Okay, because I'm just going to dump log inside laravel.log file so that through this example, we can relate how service provider and service container works. Let's hit enter. And yes, we have service class created. Now let's jump back to the code editor and inside app, we have a new directory as services. Here we have simple logger class. Now let me remove this constructor. This is not needed as of now. And I'm going to create a basic function as public function and I will name it as log. This is our custom function. Now inside this function, I will use log facade. And from here, I will be using info function. Now inside this info function, I want to log one message. So I will pass simple logger just like this. and I will concat one message that I will capture it dynamically through this function. So let's capture this message in the function parameter. And here I will import this log facade using facades. Now after logging the message, I will return one message just like logged and message. And this is our service. This is super simple. Now we will tell Laravel to handle this service. So what I will do, I will create one provider class. So I will jump to the terminal and I will create one provider using PHP artisan make provider command. So let's go ahead, PHP artisan make provider, and I will create one provider. So let's give a name as simple logger service provider. I'm giving a name just as per the class. You can create any of the service provider based on your relevancy. Let's hit enter. And yes, the providers class has been created. Now let's check out to the code editor back. Now here in the app, we have the providers, and here inside this, we have one more provider as simple logger service provider. And we already had this inbuilt app service provider, which is empty. And we already saw this was registered here in this providers array, right? Now, when we created another provider, which is simple logger service provider, this got registered automatically by Laravel here. Previously, just before Laravel 11, you had to register it manually. But now, Laravel has updated this and it automatically detects for the new service provider, and here this will register it automatically. Now after having this simple logger service provider, let's navigate inside this provider class, which is extending service provider. Okay. Now here we have two methods, register and boot, that we already discussed. As this suggests, this will register all the features in this service container. So initially this will register the feature into the service container, and further when the application starts, this will load using this boot method. So about our custom service class that we created here as simple logger, I want to register this in the container, which is service container. So what I will do, here inside this register function, I will inject it into the service container. So what I will do, I will bind it into the service container using singleton function. So I will write $this app, which is instance of application, and I will use singleton function, just like this. Now inside this singleton function, I will inject that class, which is simple logger. So let's pass simple logger and let's import it, then colon class, and let's create one function which will have app instance. Okay. Now inside this function, I will return object of this simple logger class, and that I will create it using new keyword. So let's pass this class again, just like this, and let's terminate it using semicolon. Here I have used singleton function. That means whenever we will ask for simple logger object, Laravel gives us the same instance every time. And regarding this singleton design pattern, we already covered up in our design pattern series. So if you are new to the design pattern, you can check out our playlist. So here, if you would rather get a fresh one each time, you can use bind function that will return instance every time whenever this will loads up. Now in the next step, we had to register this provider, but Laravel 12 does it automatically. So this has already registered here in this providers array, right? Now we have to use this simple logger service. So in order to use this service, we can inject this service class in any of the controller or even any other class. So as of now, I will create one controller So I will name it as test controller. Okay. Now inside this test controller, let's inject this class which is simple logger. So let's navigate to HTTP controllers. Here we have this test controller. Now here I will create one constructor. Now inside this constructor, I want to inject this simple logger service. So I will copy this class name and inside this constructor, I will inject it, and here I will define as public. Now let's create instance as simple logger. Also we have to import this class here. This is done. Now we have the object of this simple logger class, right? And by using this object, I will call its original function, which is log, right? So from the controller, I will call this log function using this simple logger instance. And we already registered this simple logger class in the container using service provider. Now let's go ahead with this implementation. So here I will create one more function as index. Now inside this index function, I will call that log function using this simple logger instance. So I will paste this simple logger instance, and by using this object, I will call that function which is log. Now this function needs one argument. So let's pass one message here. So I will pass one message directly as user accessed this test page. Okay. This is our test message. And if you have noticed, from this class, we had written this message as logged and the incoming message. So I will capture this here in this function, just like message, right? And I will put dump here $message. Now in order to execute this function, let's define one route inside web.php. So I will navigate to routes web.php, and here after this endpoint, I will create one more route as route : get, and I will name it as test. Now inside this, we have to pass the controller name, which is test controller, and we defined one function as index. So let's call this function index. Now before testing this application, let's check out a storage Laravel log. So inside a storage, we have laravel.log file, and let me clear this log file. Okay. Now let's navigate to the browser and let's access that route directly as test. Yes, we are able to access that, and this returned dump message as user accessed this test page, right? Now if we'll check out the log file, yes, in the log file, we have the log message as simple logger user accessed this test page. Now let's understand how this is working. So whenever we accessed this route in the browser, Laravel has automatically provided this logger from the container because we registered this in the service container. So if we'll navigate to this logger service, here this instance, which is simple logger, has been registered in this service container, right? But whenever we injected it here while calling this function in this test controller, Laravel has automatically handed it, and this provided from the container. So we can say Laravel will make available every services or feature for you whenever it is needed. That means on demand. Here, the simple logger object was needed in this test controller. So this was availed and injected here in this test controller constructor function whenever it was needed from this service container, right? Now let's dive into service provider boot method, because currently we used register function in order to register this simple logger instance into the container, right? But what about this boot method? So this boot method will be loaded whenever this registration has been done into the container. That means when everything is ready, this will load this boot method. So let's add one log here in order to check it whenever it is loading. So again, I will use log facade, and this time I will use debug function. Okay. And I will give one message as simple logger service provider booted. This is just one message. Okay. Now I will navigate to this laravel.log file, and again I will clear all the logs. Now let's navigate to the browser again, and I will refresh it once. Now after refreshing, here if you have noticed, this has booted, okay? And when the container is ready, this boot method is triggering continuously because everything is ready into the Laravel Service Container, and the application instance has been loaded through this index.php. And all the service providers have been registered into the container, and Laravel application is ready to serve. So this is all about service provider and service container. Now let's wrap this up. So to sum it up, the service container is your smart vending machine. This holds and gives out services, and the service provider is the manager who tells it what to stock and how to build those services. We saw register function, which set things up, meaning registers into the container, and the boot function use all the services once the app is ready. And the combo makes your application clean, testable, and professional. Now listen, understanding these two is seriously worth it if you are a Laravel developer. You will see them in almost every package you install, and interviewers love asking about them because it shows you understand Laravel at a deeper level. So do yourself a favor, practice this a couple of times, maybe even build another service like a currency converter or an API client. Once you get comfortable, you will feel like Laravel has no secrets left from you. If this video helped you, please smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future tutorials. And trust me, we have got a lot more Laravel content coming your way. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Keep coding, and I will see you in the next video.